I need a husband by Friday, or I lose everything. Lydia Hale stood in the doorway of a stranger's cabin, rain dripping from her hat brim, desperation carved into every line of her face. The man inside didn't flinch. Caleb Rourke had seen desperation before, worn it himself like a second skin. "Not looking for a wife," he said, voice flat as the prairie. "I'm not offering one," Lydia shot back. "Just a name on paper, no feelings, no strings." He studied her for a long moment. "What's in it for me?" "Same thing I get, survival. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels." The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. Lydia Hale stood at the window of her father's house, her house now, though the law didn't see it that way, watching water turn the road into a river of mud. Beyond the glass, the ranch sprawled out in shades of gray and brown. The barn with its sagging roof, the empty corral where her father's horses used to stand, the fence line that needed mending before winter came hard. Everything her father had built, everything she was about to lose. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, jaw tight. 26 years old and alone. No brothers, no husband, no man's name to shelter behind when the county clerk came calling. In 1887, a woman alone didn't own land. She just kept it warm until some man decided to take it. "Miss Hale?" Lydia turned. Ruth Brennan stood in the doorway, wringing her hands. The older woman had worked for the Hale family since before Lydia was born. Cook, housekeeper, the closest thing to a mother Lydia had left after hers died, bringing a stillborn son into the world. "Garrett Moss is here," Ruth said quietly. Again. Lydia's stomach turned. "Tell him I'm not receiving visitors. He says he won't leave until you talk to him. Then he can stand in the rain until he drowns." Ruth didn't smile. "Lydia? I mean it, Ruth." But she could already hear boots on the porch, heavy and confident. The door opened without invitation. Garrett Moss stepped inside like he owned the place, which, if Lydia didn't act fast, he would. He was 42, thick around the middle, with a handlebar mustache he waxed to sharp points. Money dripped off him, tailored vest, gold watch chain, boots that had never touched real work. He'd made his fortune buying failing ranches for pennies and flipping them to Eastern investors who'd never seen a cow outside a picture book. "Miss Hale." He removed his hat, revealing thinning hair slicked back with pomade. "I apologize for the intrusion, but we need to talk. We have nothing to discuss." "I disagree." He glanced around the room, at the worn furniture, the faded curtains, the water stain spreading across the ceiling. "Your father's debts didn't die with him." Lydia's hands curled into fists at her sides. "I'm aware of my obligations." "Are you?" Garrett's smile was all teeth. "Because the bank says otherwise. 3 months behind on the mortgage, feed bills unpaid, and come Friday when the county evaluates your claim." He let the sentence hang. "I'll have it sorted by Friday." "How?" He stepped closer. "You can't run this ranch alone, Lydia. Everyone knows it. The hands quit after your father passed. The stock scattered to hell and back. You're drowning, and you're too proud to reach for the rope." "I don't need your rope." "No?" Garrett's eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Then what do you need?" "Because I'm offering a solution. Marry me. I'll absorb the debts, keep the ranch operational, and you'll have security, comfort, a future." Lydia laughed, sharp and bitter. "Under you?" His expression hardened. "I'm trying to help you." "You're trying to steal from me. There's a difference." "Steal?" Garrett's voice rose. "I'm offering you a life. What's your alternative? Wait for the county to auction this place off piece by piece? Watch strangers turn your father's legacy into another soulless investment? Get out! Lydia, out!" For a moment, she thought he might refuse. His jaw worked, color rising in his face, but then he jammed his hat back on and turned toward the door. "You've got until Friday," he said without looking back. "After that, I won't be so generous." The door slammed. Lydia stood very still, listening to his horse splash away down the muddy road. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Ruth touched her arm gently. "He's not wrong about Friday." "I know. So what are you going to do?" Lydia turned back to the window. Through the rain, she could just make out the northern boundary of her land. a crooked fence line that separated her property from the wild country beyond. Somewhere out there, in a cabin she'd only seen from a distance, lived Caleb Rourke, the town ghost, the man nobody knew. "Something stupid," Lydia said quietly. Caleb Rourke heard the horse before he saw the rider. He was inside his cabin, mending a bridle by lamplight, when the sound of hooves pulled his attention to the window. Rain blurred everything beyond the glass, but he caught movement, a figure on horseback, coming up the trail that led to his door. Nobody came up that trail. He set the bridle aside and reached for the rifle leaning against the wall. Not because he expected trouble, though trouble had found him before, but because a man living alone learned to be careful. The knock came hard and urgent. Caleb crossed the room and opened the door just wide enough to see who was fool enough to ride through a storm to his doorstep. A woman, soaked to the bone, hat dripping, eyes fierce. "Caleb Rourke?" she demanded. He didn't answer immediately, just studied her. Tall for a woman, raw-boned and strong, with dark hair plastered to her neck and mud splattered up to her knees. He recognized her, Lydia Hale, the rancher's daughter. They'd never spoken, but he'd seen her in town once or twice. She didn't look like the kind of woman who rattled easy, but she looked rattled now. "Depends who's asking," he said finally. "Lydia Hale. I own the ranch south of here." "I know who you are. Then you know my father died 2 months ago." Caleb's expression didn't change. "I heard. And you probably heard the rest, that I'm about to lose everything unless I can prove I'm not running the place alone." Her chin lifted. "I need a husband by Friday. I'm here to offer you the position." For a long moment, Caleb just stared at her. Then, slowly, he stepped back and gestured inside. "You'd better come in before you freeze." Lydia hesitated, probably weighing the risk of stepping into a stranger's cabin against the misery of staying in the rain, then dismounted and followed him inside. The cabin was small. One room, neatly kept. A bed in the corner, a table and 2 chairs, a wood stove radiating warmth. Sparse, but clean. Everything in its place. A soldier's discipline, or a convict's. "Sit," Caleb said, nodding toward the stove. Lydia pulled off her gloves and moved closer to the heat. Water dripped from her coat onto the floorboards. Caleb hung his rifle back on its pegs and leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Now," he said. "Say that again." "I need a husband." "Why me?" "Because you're not Garrett Moss." Caleb's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "That the man who wants your land, among other things? And you think I'm better?" Lydia met his eyes. "I think you're someone who understands deals. No romance, no expectations, just business." "What makes you think that?" "Because you've been living out here alone for 3 years, and in all that time I've never heard your name attached to anyone or anything. You don't go to church. You don't drink in the saloon. You don't talk. You just exist." She paused. "That tells me you're not looking for connection, which is exactly what I need." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "What's the arrangement?" "Marriage in name only. You sign the papers, show up for the county evaluation on Friday, and help me keep the ranch operational long enough to prove I can manage it. After that," she shrugged, "we can dissolve the marriage, or we can keep living like we are now, separate. Your choice." "And what do I get?" "A share of the ranch? 20%. "Not enough." Lydia's eyes narrowed. 30, 40, and a say in how the operation runs. 35, and you stay out of my way unless I ask for help." Caleb considered. "What about debts?" "My problem, not yours. If we're married, they become my problem. Not if the agreement says otherwise." "County won't care what the agreement says." Lydia's jaw tightened. "Then what do you suggest?" "I cover half the debts. In exchange, I get 40% and equal say." "That's not a marriage. That's a partnership." "Isn't that what you're asking for?" She stared at him, weighing it. He could see the calculations running behind her eyes. Pride versus pragmatism, control versus survival. 35%, she said finally. "Equal say on major decisions, but the ranch stays in my name." "Fine. And no expectations. We're business partners, nothing more." Caleb pushed off the wall and crossed to the table. From a drawer, he pulled out a half-empty bottle of whiskey and 2 tin cups. He poured 2 fingers into each and slid one toward Lydia. To business, he said. Lydia picked up the cup. Her hand was steady. To survival. They drank. Outside, the rain hammered down, relentless and cold. The wedding was a grim affair. No flowers, no music. No guests except Ruth Brennan and the justice of the peace, a sour-faced man named Aldrich, who clearly had better things to do on a Thursday morning. Lydia wore a simple gray dress, practical, not pretty. Caleb wore the same clothes he'd worn the night before. Dark trousers, a plain shirt, a coat that had seen better days. He'd shaved, at least. That was something. They stood side by side in the front room of Lydia's house, stiff and formal, while Aldrich droned through the ceremony. Do you, Caleb Rourke, take this woman? I do. And do you, Lydia Hale, take this man? I do. No hesitation, no emotion, just words. By the power vested in me by the state of Montana, I now pronounce you man and wife. Aldrich closed his book with a snap. You may kiss the bride. Lydia and Caleb looked at each other. Neither moved. Or not, Aldrich muttered. Sign here. They signed. Lydia's hand was steady. Caleb's handwriting was surprisingly neat, careful, controlled. When it was done, Aldrich handed them the certificate and left without another word. Ruth lingered. I'll make coffee, she said quietly. Don't bother, Lydia replied. We're done here. Caleb folded the marriage certificate and tucked it into his coat pocket. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll go over the books. Fine. He turned toward the door, then paused. Lydia. She looked at him. This doesn't change anything, he said. We both know what this is. I know exactly what it is. He nodded once and left. Lydia stood in the empty room, listening to his footsteps fade. She should have felt relief. Garrett Moss couldn't touch her now, and the county would have no grounds to challenge her claim. She'd won. So why did she feel so hollow? Ruth appeared in the doorway. Are you all right? Lydia turned away from the door. I just married a stranger to save my father's ranch. How all right can I be, yet... Friday came cold and clear. The county assessor arrived at noon, a weasel-faced man named Tinker who rode up to the house with a clipboard and an expression that said he expected to find chaos. He didn't. Lydia met him at the door, Caleb at her side. The barn roof had been patched overnight, Caleb's work. The fences were mended, the corral cleaned, and inside the account books were balanced and ready for inspection. Tinker looked disappointed. Mrs. Rourke, he said, making the name sound like an accusation. I'll need to verify your situation. Verify away, Lydia said coolly. Tinker poked around for an hour, inspecting the barn, counting stock, grilling Lydia and Caleb about their plans for the winter. Caleb answered in monosyllables, his face unreadable. Lydia kept her responses crisp and professional. Finally, Tinker ran out of things to criticize. He made a note on his clipboard, sniffed, and mounted his horse. Everything appears to be in order, he said grudgingly. For now. Good, Lydia said. Then we're done. Tinker rode off. Lydia watched him go, arms crossed, until he disappeared over the ridge. Only then did she let out a breath. That's it? Caleb asked. That's it. He nodded. I'll head back then. Caleb? He stopped. Lydia turned to face him. Thank you. He studied her for a moment, those pale eyes giving nothing away. It's just business. I know, but still. He touched the brim of his hat and walked toward his horse. Lydia watched him mount up and ride north, back toward his cabin and his solitary life. For the first time in months, the ranch was hers. Legally, undeniably hers. And she'd never felt more alone. The first week passed in silence. Lydia threw herself into work, mending what needed mending, organizing what needed organizing, trying to outrun the weight of everything she'd lost. She woke before dawn and collapsed after dark, too exhausted to think. Caleb kept his distance. He came by twice to check on things, stayed long enough to make sure nothing was falling apart, then left without conversation. Polite? Professional? Exactly what they'd agreed to. It should have been perfect, but the silence got louder every day. Ruth noticed. You're working yourself to death, she said one evening, watching Lydia scrub mud off the kitchen floor for the third time that week. I'm fine. You're not, and neither is he. Lydia looked up sharply. What are you talking about? Your husband. He came by this morning while you were out, fixed the gate hinge without a word, and left before I could thank him. So? So he's trying, Lydia, in his own way. We have an arrangement, that's all. Ruth shook her head. Keep telling yourself that. But that night, lying in bed, Lydia couldn't stop thinking about it. About Caleb appearing in the rain to help. About him standing beside her when Tinker came. About the gate hinge she'd been meaning to fix for weeks, now working smoothly because a man who owed her nothing had taken the time to care. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't mean anything. But it bothered her anyway. 2 weeks after the wedding, the water pump broke. Lydia was hauling buckets from the creek, backbreaking, miserable work, when Caleb appeared on horseback, leading a pack mule loaded with tools. Heard your pump was out, he said. Lydia straightened, bucket still in hand. How? Ruth mentioned it in town. And you just came? That's the deal, isn't it? I help keep things running. Lydia set the bucket down. I didn't ask for help. I know. He dismounted and started unloading tools. Lydia stood there, torn between pride and practicality, before finally grabbing a wrench and joining him. They worked in silence. Caleb had steady hands and knew his way around machinery. No hesitation, no wasted motion. Lydia handed him tools when he needed them and stayed out of his way otherwise. By late afternoon, the pump was running again. Thanks, Lydia said, wiping grease off her hands. Caleb packed up his tools. You'll need a new gasket soon. This one's patched. I'll handle it. He nodded and started to leave. Caleb. He paused. Why are you doing this? He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since the wedding. Because you can't do everything alone. And I gave my word. This isn't part of the deal. Maybe not, but it's the right thing. He mounted his horse and rode off, leaving Lydia standing by the pump, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. November came hard and fast. The first snow fell on a Monday, blanketing the ranch in white silence. Lydia woke to find fresh wood stacked by her door, Caleb's work, though he hadn't said a word about it. The next day, he repaired a section of fence she hadn't even noticed was down. The day after that, he brought a side of venison and hung it in the smokehouse without explanation. Small things, quiet things, things that shouldn't have mattered, but they did. Ruth noticed the change. He's courting you, she said one evening. Lydia nearly choked on her coffee. He is not. Not with flowers and poetry, maybe, but he's showing up, providing, making your life easier. Ruth smiled. That's courting, frontier style. It's practical, nothing more. If you say so. But Lydia couldn't stop thinking about it. She started noticing things. The way Caleb always positioned himself between her and trouble. Subtle, protective, never overbearing. The way he remembered details she'd mentioned in passing. The way he worked, focused, methodical, like every task mattered because it was hers. It unnerved her. Because somewhere along the way, the lines had started to blur. The Saturday before Thanksgiving, Lydia rode out to Caleb's cabin. She told herself it was practical. She needed to discuss winter feed, and it was easier to talk in person than send messages through Ruth. But as she approached the cabin, her heart hammered in a way that had nothing to do with business. Caleb was outside chopping wood. He stopped when he saw her, axe still in hand. Lydia, we need to talk. He set the axe down. About? This. She gestured between them. Whatever this is. Caleb's expression didn't change. You want to renegotiate? No, I want to understand what you're doing. I'm keeping my word. You're doing more than that. Lydia dismounted, frustration bleeding into her voice. The wood, the venison, the fence. You're acting like what? Like you care. The words hung between them, sharp and dangerous. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low. Would that be so bad? Lydia's breath caught. We had a deal. I know. No feelings, no obligations. I remember. Then why? Because deals change, Lydia. He took a step closer. People change. I haven't changed. Haven't you? She stared at him, trapped between denial and truth. Because he was right. Somewhere between the wedding and now, something had shifted. The walls she'd built so carefully had started crumbling, and she didn't know how to stop it. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she said quietly. "I know. We were supposed to stay separate. We are separate. You're at your place. I'm at mine." "Then why does it feel like you're everywhere?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "Because I am. Whether you like it or not, I'm part of this now, part of your life, part of the ranch, and I'm not going to apologize for giving a damn." Lydia's chest tightened. "I can't—" "I'm not asking you to do anything," Caleb interrupted. "I'm just telling you the truth. You asked what I'm doing. I'm trying to be someone you can count on. That's all." "That's not all." "No," he admitted. "It's not." The air between them crackled with everything unsaid. Lydia should have left, should have climbed back on her horse and ridden away before this went any further. But she didn't move. Couldn't move. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Neither do I." "Then what are we supposed to—" The sound of hooves cut her off. Both of them turned. A rider was coming up the trail, fast. Lydia recognized the horse, one of the hands from the neighboring ranch. The rider reined in hard, breathing heavy. "Mrs. Rourke, there's trouble. Garrett Moss is at your place. Showed up with the sheriff and some papers." Lydia's blood turned to ice. "What kind of papers?" "Don't know, but he's claiming the ranch is his." Caleb was already moving. "Saddle up," he said to Lydia. "We're going." They rode hard, side by side, the cold wind biting at their faces. And for the first time since the wedding, Lydia didn't feel alone. They reached the ranch with the horses lathered and breathing hard. 3 men stood on Lydia's porch like they owned it. Garrett Moss in his tailored coat, Sheriff Doyle with his hand resting on his gun belt, and a thin man in spectacles clutching a leather satchel. Lydia dismounted before her horse fully stopped. Caleb was right behind her. "What the hell is this?" she demanded. Garrett smiled, that same oily smile that made her want to scrub her skin. "Mrs. Rourke and Mr. Rourke. How convenient." "Get off my property." "Your property?" Garrett's smile widened. "That's what we're here to discuss." Sheriff Doyle shifted uncomfortably. He was a decent man, generally speaking, but he followed the law even when the law was being twisted into knots. "Miss Hale, Mrs. Rourke, Mr. Moss has presented some documents that require investigation." "What documents?" Lydia's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. The thin man with spectacles stepped forward. "I'm Edward Pritchard, attorney at law. My client has proof that your father took a loan from him 3 years ago, using the ranch as collateral. The loan was never repaid." "That's a lie." "I have the papers right here." Pritchard pulled documents from his satchel. "Signed by Thomas Hale, witnessed and notarized. Upon his death, the debt transferred to his heir, you. Since you failed to make payment, my client is within his rights to foreclose." Lydia snatched the papers. Her eyes scanned the page, her father's signature at the bottom, bold and unmistakable. But something was wrong. The ink was too fresh, the paper too crisp. "This is forged," she said flatly. "Be careful with accusations," Pritchard warned. "That's a serious charge." "And theft is a serious crime," Caleb said quietly. All eyes turned to him. He'd been so still, so silent, that they'd almost forgotten he was there. Now he stepped up beside Lydia, close enough that their shoulders touched. Garrett's smile faltered. "This doesn't concern you, Rourke. My wife's property concerns me." "Your wife of convenience, you mean? Everyone knows what this is." Garrett gestured between them dismissively. "A desperate woman and a drifter playing house to fool the county. Well, the game's over. This ranch belongs to me." "Show me the original loan ledger," Caleb said. Pritchard blinked. "Excuse me?" "If Thomas Hale took a loan 3 years ago, there'd be a record in the bank's ledger. Original entries dated and signed by both parties. Show me that." Pritchard's mouth opened and closed. "The ledger isn't necessary. The contract speaks for itself." "Then you won't mind us verifying it." "I don't have to prove anything to you." "No," Caleb agreed. "But you'll have to prove it to a judge. And if this document is fraudulent, you and your client will be facing charges." He paused. "Federal charges, since you're claiming a notarized contract that involves government officials." The silence stretched thin and dangerous. Sheriff Doyle cleared his throat. He's got a point, Moss. We should verify the ledger before we proceed. This is ridiculous, Garrett snapped. I don't need to. Unless you can't, Lydia interrupted. Unless this whole thing is a setup. Garrett's face flushed dark red. You have no idea what you're accusing me of? I think I do. For a moment, she thought he might lunge at her, his hands curled into fists, jaw working like he was chewing nails. But Caleb shifted, barely a movement, just a slight redistribution of weight, and suddenly he was positioned between Lydia and Garrett. Not aggressive, not threatening, just there. Garrett seemed to realize he was outmatched. He straightened his vest and forced his expression back into something resembling civility. Fine, he said tightly. We'll verify the ledger, but when it proves I'm right, I want you both off this property by sunset. And when it proves you're a liar? Lydia asked. Garrett's smile was cold. Then I suppose we'll see each other in court. He turned and stalked toward his horse. Pritchard scrambled after him, clutching his satchel. Sheriff Doyle lingered, looking apologetic. I'm sorry about this, he said quietly, but I have to follow procedure. I understand, Lydia said. Just make sure you follow it all the way, including fraud investigation. Doyle nodded and mounted up. The three men rode off, leaving Lydia and Caleb standing in the yard. Lydia's hands were shaking. She looked down at the forged contract, her father's signature staring back at her like a ghost. He won't stop, she said quietly. I know. Even if we prove this is fake, he'll find another way. Probably. So what do we do? Caleb took the papers from her hands and studied them. We go to the bank, get the real ledger, prove this is bullshit. Then we figure out what Moss really wants and cut him off at the knees. Lydia looked at him. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Why? He met her eyes. Because you're not alone anymore. And the sooner Moss figures that out, the better. Something in her chest cracked open. Just a little, just enough to let something warm and terrifying slip through. She nodded. Okay. Okay. They stood there for a moment longer, the wind cold against their faces, the weight of everything pressing down. Then Caleb handed her back the papers and headed toward the barn. Where are you going? Lydia called. To move my things. What? He stopped and turned. If we're going to convince everyone this marriage is real, I need to be here, not halfway across the valley. Lydia's breath caught. You want to move in? Not want. Need. Moss is watching. So is the county. So is everyone else in this town. They need to see a husband and wife, not two strangers with a piece of paper. We agreed. I know what we agreed, and I'm not asking to share your bed, Lydia, but I need to be under the same roof, separate rooms, separate lives, but visible. He was right. She knew he was right. But the thought of Caleb Rourke living in her house, eating at her table, existing in her space every single day. Fine, she said before she could talk herself out of it. But you stay out of my way. Wasn't planning on getting in it. He disappeared into the barn. Lydia stood alone in the yard, heart hammering, wondering what the hell she'd just agreed to. Ruth appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. Well, she said, this should be interesting. Lydia shot her a look. Not one word. Ruth's smile was infuriating. Wouldn't dream of it, sob. Caleb moved in that afternoon with everything he owned. 2 saddlebags, a rifle, a bedroll, and a wooden box he carried carefully, like it held something precious. He took the small room off the kitchen, barely more than a closet, but it had a window and space for a bed. He didn't ask for anything else, didn't rearrange furniture or stake territorial claims, just unpacked his few belongings and settled in like a ghost. Dinner that night was awkward. Ruth had made stew, thick and hearty, the kind that stuck to your ribs. Lydia and Caleb sat across from each other at the kitchen table while Ruth served, her eyes dancing with amusement at their careful silence. So, Ruth said brightly, how long have you two known each other now? 3 weeks? 4, Lydia said tightly. And already married. That must be some kind of record. Ruth, Lydia warned. I'm just making conversation. Ruth ladled stew into Caleb's bowl. You've barely said 10 words to each other since the wedding. Might as well start now. Caleb looked up from his food. We talk. About business, fences, and feed bills. That's not talking. What else is there? Lydia asked. Ruth laughed. Everything else. where you're from, what you like, what you can't stand, the things that make you human. We don't need to be human, Lydia said. We just need to get through winter. Suit yourself? Ruth set the pot down and headed for the door. I'll be in town tomorrow. Need anything? No? Caleb? He shook his head. Ruth left, still smiling. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lydia ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Caleb did the same. The scrape of spoons against bowls seemed deafening. Finally, Lydia couldn't take it anymore. Where are you from? She asked abruptly. Caleb looked up, surprised. What? Ruth's right. We don't know anything about each other? So, where are you from? He set down his spoon. Does it matter? Apparently. He was quiet for a long moment, weighing whether to answer. Missouri, he said finally. Originally. Family? Dead. The word landed heavy. Lydia didn't push. You? Caleb asked. Here, born and raised. My mother died when I was 12. My father raised me alone. He did a good job. Lydia blinked. What? You're strong, capable, not afraid of hard work. That doesn't happen by accident. Something warm unfurled in her chest. He was a good man. I believe it. They ate in silence again, but this time it felt different, less hostile, almost comfortable. Why Montana? Lydia asked after a while. Needed distance. From what? Caleb's jaw tightened. The past. Lydia recognized the wall going up and didn't press. She had her own walls. Fair enough. They finished eating. Caleb cleared the dishes without being asked, working alongside Lydia at the wash basin. Their hands brushed once, brief, accidental, and Lydia jerked away like she'd been burned. Sorry, Caleb muttered. It's fine. It wasn't fine. Her skin was still tingling where he'd touched her. When the dishes were done, Caleb retreated to his room without another word. Lydia stood in the kitchen, staring at the closed door, trying to figure out what the hell was happening to her. The next morning, they rode to town together. It was practical. They both had business there, and riding separately would have looked strange. But sitting side by side on horseback, the cold air sharp between them, felt oddly intimate. Ridgeback was a scattered collection of buildings clustered around a single muddy street. The general store, the saloon, the bank, the assayer's office, a hotel that had seen better days. People stopped and stared as Lydia and Caleb rode in, whispers following in their wake. They're watching, Lydia said quietly. Let them. They hitched their horses outside the bank. Inside, the clerk, a nervous man named Perkins, looked up from his ledger and went pale. Mrs. Rourke, he stammered. Mr. Rourke, how can I help you? We need to see the loan records for Thomas Hale, Lydia said, going back 5 years. Perkins blinked rapidly. I'm not sure I'm authorized. You're authorized, Caleb said quietly, unless you want the sheriff asking why you're obstructing an investigation. Perkins' face went from pale to gray. I'll check. He disappeared into the back. Lydia leaned against the counter, arms crossed, radiating barely controlled fury. Caleb stood beside her, still and watchful. You're good at this, Lydia said. At what? Being intimidating without trying. I'm not trying to intimidate anyone. Exactly. Perkins returned with a massive ledger and set it on the counter with a thud. Here, all transactions for Thomas Hale. Lydia flipped through the pages, scanning entries. Caleb read over her shoulder, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. There, 3 years ago. A loan taken out for equipment repairs. $500 paid back in full 6 months later. Documented. Verified. No mention of any collateral. There's nothing here, Lydia said. Exactly. Caleb tapped the page. Which means Moss's contract is fake. Perkins looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. I didn't know anything about another loan, I swear. Who else has access to these records? Caleb asked. Just me and Mr. Whitmore, the bank president, but he's been in Denver for 2 weeks. Convenient. Lydia straightened. We need copies of these pages. I can make them, but it'll take time. We've got time. While Perkins worked, Lydia and Caleb stepped outside. Across the street, Garrett Moss stood in front of the saloon, watching them. When their eyes met, he smiled and tipped his hat. Lydia's hands curled into fists. "Easy," Caleb murmured. "He's taunting us." "I know." "I want to wipe that smile off his face." "So do I, but not here, not now." Garrett started walking toward them. Lydia tensed, but Caleb's hand brushed hers. Light, brief, grounding. She forced herself to breathe. Garrett stopped a few feet away, all false charm. "Well, well, the happy couple, checking your finances?" "Verifying them," Lydia said coldly. "Find anything interesting?" "Proof that you're a liar." Garrett's smile didn't waver. "Strong words. I hope you can back them up." "We can." "Then I look forward to seeing your evidence." He tipped his hat again. "Until then, enjoy your arrangement. I'm sure it's very fulfilling." He walked away, whistling. Lydia was shaking with rage. "I'm going to kill him." "No, you're not." "I'm going to think about it very hard." "That's fine." Caleb's calm was infuriating and steadying in equal measure. Lydia forced herself to unclench her fists. Perkins emerged with the copies. They paid him, tucked the papers safely away, and headed back to their horses. But as they mounted up, a commotion erupted at the end of the street. A wagon had overturned, spilling crates everywhere. A woman was screaming, her child trapped underneath. Lydia and Caleb moved at the same time. They reached the wagon in seconds. The child, a boy, maybe 8, was pinned beneath the wheel, crying in pain. The mother was trying to lift the wagon herself, failing, panic making her clumsy. "Ma'am, step back," Caleb said. He positioned himself at the wagon's edge. Lydia moved opposite him without needing to be told. They locked eyes. "On 3, Caleb said. 1, 2, 3. They lifted together. The wagon rose, heavy, awkward, but they held it. The mother dragged her son free. He was bleeding from a gash on his leg, but alive. "Now," Caleb grunted. They lowered the wagon. Lydia's arms screamed in protest, but she didn't let go until it was down safe. The mother was sobbing, clutching her son. "Thank you, thank you, thank..." A crowd had gathered. Lydia became aware of eyes on them, on her and Caleb standing side by side, breathing hard, covered in dirt. Someone started clapping, then someone else. Within moments, the whole street was applauding. Lydia felt heat rise in her face. Caleb looked equally uncomfortable. They mounted their horses quickly and rode out of town, the sound of applause fading behind them. They didn't speak until they were well clear of Ridgeback. "That was..." Lydia started. "Yeah, we make a good team." Caleb glanced at her. "We do." Something passed between them then, an acknowledgement of something shifting. They'd worked together before, but this was different, instinctive, seamless, like they'd been doing it for years instead of weeks. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt right. Winter deepened, and with it came routine. Caleb rose before dawn to tend the stock. Lydia managed the books and planned the spring planting. They worked in parallel, their paths crossing at breakfast and dinner, conversations brief and practical. But small things started accumulating. Caleb fixed the loose floorboard in the hallway that had squeaked for months. Lydia left coffee warming on the stove when he came in from the cold. He carved a new handle for her favorite knife when the old one cracked. She mended the tear in his coat without mentioning it. Acts of service, quiet and unremarked. Ruth watched it all with knowing eyes but kept her mouth shut. The town talked, of course. But the talk shifted. No longer whispers about a marriage of convenience. Now people spoke of the Rourkes as a unit. Solid, dependable. The couple who'd lifted a wagon to save a child, who rode into town together, who stood shoulder to shoulder against Garrett Moss's schemes. Moss himself had gone quiet. Too quiet. "He's planning something," Lydia said one night. They were sitting by the fire. Lydia in her father's old chair, Caleb on the bench he'd dragged in from the porch. The wind howled outside, but inside it was warm. "I know," Caleb said. "The ledger copies should be enough to prove his contract is fake. Should be. But men like Moss don't give up easy." "So what do we do?" Caleb stared into the fire. "We stay ready, and we don't give him any openings." Lydia pulled her shawl tighter. I'm tired of fighting. I know. My father spent his whole life building this place, and in 2 months, I've nearly lost it twice. But you haven't lost it. Only because you're here. Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her. You would have found a way. Maybe, maybe not. She met his eyes. I'm glad I didn't have to find out. The fire crackled between them. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and silent, blanketing the world in white. Caleb? Yeah? Why did you really say yes to marrying me? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because I understood. Understood what? What it's like to need something to hold on to build a life around. And I figured maybe we could help each other do that. Is that all? He smiled, small, barely there. You want me to say I was swept off my feet? No, I just want the truth. The truth is I saw someone fighting for something that mattered, and I wanted to be part of that fight. He paused. Still do. Lydia's throat tightened. This wasn't supposed to get complicated. I know. We were supposed to stay separate. We are separate. Are we? Caleb stood and crossed to the window, looking out at the falling snow. I don't know anymore. Lydia joined him. They stood side by side, watching the storm build. Their reflections overlapped in the glass, two figures blurring into one. I'm scared, Lydia admitted quietly. Of what? Of needing you, of what happens if this becomes real. It already is real. You know what I mean. He did. She could see it in his face, the same fear, the same wanting, the same desperate attempt to hold the line they'd drawn. We don't have to figure it out tonight, Caleb said. When then? When we're ready. And if we're never ready? He turned to face her fully. Then we keep doing what we're doing, and we stop pretending it doesn't mean anything. Lydia's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. She should step back, should retreat to the safety of distance and denial. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was. Okay, she whispered. Okay. The snow fell harder, and the wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the darkness, trouble was brewing. But for now, in this moment, Lydia let herself feel something other than fear. She let herself feel hope. 3 days before Christmas, Victor Kane rode into Ridgeback. He was everything Garrett Moss pretended to be. Smooth, sophisticated, dangerous in a way that didn't announce itself. Tall and lean, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that calculated the value of everything they touched. He took a room at the hotel and made himself at home. By the second day, everyone knew who he was, a land broker from Chicago with money to burn and no patience for small-town resistance. He bought drinks at the saloon, chatted up the merchants, and asked casual questions about who owned what. Lydia's name came up often. She heard about it from Ruth, who'd heard it from the seamstress, who'd heard it from the barkeep. He's asking about the ranch, Ruth said, kneading bread with more force than necessary. How much land you've got. How many head of cattle. Whether you're looking to sell. Lydia's stomach turned. And what are people telling him? That you're not. But he doesn't seem to care. That evening, Kane showed up at the ranch. He rode in alone, hands visible, expression pleasant. Lydia met him in the yard with Caleb at her side and Ruth watching from the porch. Mrs. Rourke, Kane said, dismounting smoothly. I apologize for dropping by unannounced. I'm Victor Kane. I know who you are. His smile widened. My reputation precedes me. I'm flattered. It's not a compliment. No, I suppose it wouldn't be. May I speak plainly? You're going to whether I say yes or not. Kane laughed, genuine amusement lighting his face. I like you already. All right then. Plain speech. I'm interested in purchasing your property. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale, Mrs. Rourke. It's just a matter of price. Not this. Kane's eyes flicked to Caleb, then back to Lydia. I understand your father built this place from nothing. That's admirable. But sentiment doesn't pay bills, and from what I hear, you're drowning in them. You heard wrong, did I? He pulled a folded paper from his coat. Bank records show you're 3 months behind on your mortgage, feed bills unpaid, equipment in disrepair. You're one bad winter away from losing everything. Those records are private. Money makes things public. He held out the paper. I'm offering twice the assessed value. Enough to clear your debts and set you up somewhere easier, somewhere you wouldn't have to break your back every day just to survive. Lydia didn't take the paper. I'm not interested. Think about it. You're young. You could start over. I said no. Kane's pleasant expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Mrs. Rourke, I've made this offer out of respect, but respect only goes so far. If you refuse, I'll simply wait for the bank to foreclose and buy the property at auction for a fraction of what I'm offering now. The bank won't foreclose. Won't it? How long can you hold out? Another month? 2? Spring is a long way off, and winters here are brutal. He glanced at Caleb again, even with help. Caleb stepped forward. She gave you her answer. And who are you exactly? The hired muscle? Her husband. Kane's eyebrows rose. How convenient. A struggling rancher suddenly married to a man no one's ever heard of. Forgive my skepticism. Nothing to forgive, just leave. For a moment, tension crackled thick enough to choke on. Then Kane smiled again, smooth, unthreatening, like none of this bothered him in the slightest. I'll leave my offer on the table, he said, tucking the paper back into his coat. When you change your mind, and you will, you know where to find me. He mounted his horse and rode off, unhurried and confident. Lydia watched him go, fury and fear warring in her chest. He's worse than Moss, she said quietly. Yeah, Caleb agreed. He is. That night, neither of them slept well. Lydia lay in her bed listening to the house settle around her, every creak and groan making her wonder if Kane had sent someone to finish what words couldn't. It was irrational. The man was too smart to do anything obvious, but fear didn't care about rational thought. Around 2 a.m, she gave up and went to the kitchen. She found Caleb already there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee gone cold. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. He looked up. No. She poured herself coffee and sat across from him. The lamp between them cast long shadows across the walls. He's going to push, Lydia said. Kane, he's not the type to take no for an answer. I know. And if the bank really does have me listed as delinquent, we'll handle it. How? With what money? She laughed, bitter and exhausted. I've been robbing one account to pay another for months. The cattle prices dropped after the summer drought. Half the equipment needs replacing. I'm barely keeping my head above water, and Kane knows it. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and disappeared into his room. When he came back, he was carrying the wooden box she'd seen him handle so carefully when he moved in. He set it on the table and opened it. Inside was money, a lot of money. Neat stacks of bills, bundled and organized. Lydia stared. Where did you get that? Saved it. Over the years. That's got to be thousands of dollars. Close to 5,000. Her breath caught. Caleb, it's yours. Use it to clear the debts, pay off the bank, get the equipment you need. I can't take your money. It's not mine anymore. It's ours. That's what marriage means. A real marriage, maybe. But this is real, Caleb interrupted, whether we planned it that way or not. And if Kane thinks he can wait us out, he's wrong. We're going to prove him wrong. Lydia's eyes burned. She looked at the money, at Caleb, at the impossible choice he was offering her. Pride warred with necessity. She'd spent her whole life refusing handouts, refusing to be seen as weak or dependent. But this wasn't a handout. This was a partner choosing to invest in their shared future. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this? Caleb sat back down. Because I've spent 3 years living alone, saving money for something I couldn't even name. And then you showed up in the rain asking for help, and for the first time in a long time, I had a reason to use it. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Lydia closed her eyes. When she opened them, Caleb was watching her with that steady, unreadable gaze that somehow made her feel seen and safe at the same time. 35% isn't enough, she said finally. Not for this. We had a deal. Deals change. You said so yourself. She pushed the box back toward him. 50-50. Full partners. Equal say in everything. Lydia, that's my offer. Take it or leave it. Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. An actual smile. Small but real. You drive a hard bargain. I learned from the best. He held out his hand. Partners. She took it. Partners. They shook, and something fundamental shifted between them. The walls they'd built so carefully were crumbling faster than either could repair them. And maybe, just maybe, That was okay. The next morning, they rode to the bank together and paid off every outstanding debt in full. Perkins nearly fainted when Caleb counted out the bills. By noon, the news had spread through Ridgeback like wildfire. By evening, Victor Kane knew. He appeared at the ranch 3 days later, his pleasant mask slightly cracked. "Mrs. Rourke," he said, dismounting with less grace than before. "I heard you came into some money." "Did you?" "Paid off your debts in full, I'm told. That's impressive. Where did you find the capital?" "My husband provided it." Kane's eyes narrowed. "Your husband, who appeared out of nowhere just in time to save you. How fortunate, isn't it? You'll forgive my curiosity, but I've made inquiries about Mr. Rourke, and I can't seem to find any record of him before he showed up in Montana 3 years ago. No family, no history, no past at all." He paused. "Makes a man wonder what he's running from." Caleb stepped out of the barn, rifle resting casually in the crook of his arm. Not aimed at Kane, not threatening, just there. "Wondering's free," Caleb said, "but digging costs." Kane's smile was sharp. "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact. You want to know about my past, you'll have to work for it. And I promise you, it's not worth the effort." "I'll be the judge of that." "No," Lydia said, moving to stand beside Caleb. "You won't. Because whatever Caleb did or didn't do before he came here doesn't matter. What matters is that he's here now, and we're not selling." Kane looked between them, reassessing. "You're making a mistake. We'll live with it. Will you? Because winter's just getting started, Mrs. Rourke, and I'm a patient man." "So are we." Kane mounted his horse, but he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he sat there, looking down at them with something like regret. "I tried to do this the easy way," he said quietly. "Remember that." He rode off, leaving those words hanging in the cold air like a curse. Lydia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He's going to escalate. Yeah. What do we do? Caleb checked the rifle's action. "We get ready." Over the next week, they fortified the ranch like they were preparing for siege. Caleb rode the property line every morning and evening, checking for signs of tampering. Lydia inventoried supplies and made sure they had enough to last through a hard winter, even if they couldn't get to town for weeks. Ruth watched their preparations with growing concern. "You think Kane's going to do something?" she asked one morning. "I think he's not used to being told no," Lydia said, "and men like that don't take it well. Maybe you should reconsider. Sell the ranch and start over somewhere safe." "This is my home." "It's just land, Lydia." "No, it's not." Lydia looked out the window at the snow-covered fields. "It's everything my father worked for, everything he wanted me to have. And I'm not giving it up because some rich bastard from Chicago thinks he can bully me into submission." Ruth sighed. "You're as stubborn as Tom ever was." "I'll take that as a compliment." But that night, lying in bed, Lydia wondered if Ruth was right. Was she being stubborn or stupid? Was she risking everything, including Caleb, for pride? She didn't have an answer. The trouble came on a Tuesday. Lydia was in the barn repairing tack when she heard shouting. She grabbed a pitchfork and ran outside to find 3 men on horseback circling Caleb in the yard. She recognized 2 of them, ranch hands who'd worked for her father before quitting after he died. The third was a stranger, hard-faced and mean-looking. "Problem?" Lydia called out. The stranger turned to look at her. "No problem, just delivering a message." "I'm listening." "Mr. Kane wanted us to remind you that his offer's still open, but the price just dropped, seeing as how you're being difficult." "Tell Mr. Kane he can take his offer and—" "Lydia," Caleb said quietly. She looked at him. He was standing very still, hands loose at his sides, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "What's the real message?" Caleb asked. The stranger smiled. "Smart man." "The real message is that Mr. Kane's tired of waiting, and when he gets tired, accidents start happening. Fires, fence lines cut, cattle wandering off." He shrugged. "Hard to keep a ranch running when everything keeps going wrong." "That sounds like a threat," Lydia said. "That sounds like a fact of life out here. Lots of things can go wrong in winter." "Get off my property." "We're going, but you think about what we said." The stranger tipped his hat mockingly. "Be a shame if something happened to this nice place you got here." They rode off, laughing. Lydia's hands were shaking with rage. "We should go to the sheriff." And tell him what? They didn't actually threaten anything, just made observations. That's bullshit, and you know it. Doesn't matter. Doyle won't move without proof. So what do we do? Caleb looked at the horizon where the three men had disappeared. We watch, and we wait. That night, Caleb didn't sleep in his room. He took his bedroll and spread it in the barn, rifle within reach. Lydia tried to argue, but he was immovable. If they come back, they'll come at night, he said, and they'll go for the barn first. Fire spreads fast in this cold. Wood's dry, haze everywhere. They torch this, we lose everything. Then I'm staying with you. No. It's my barn, Caleb, my ranch. And you're no good to it dead. Stay in the house. Keep watch from the window. If you see anything, fire a shot. They stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Finally, Caleb said, Please. The word surprised them both. Lydia swallowed hard. Fine. But if anything happens, you'll hear the gunshot. She left him there, armed and alone in the dark, and went back to the house. She didn't sleep, just sat by the window with her father's shotgun across her lap, watching the barn. Hours passed. The moon rose and fell. Nothing moved except wind-blown snow. Dawn came gray and cold. Lydia went to the barn and found Caleb exactly where she'd left him, eyes red from lack of sleep, but alert. Anything? She asked. No. Maybe they were just trying to scare us. Maybe. But neither of them believed it. The waiting was worse than any direct confrontation. Every sound made Lydia jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. She and Caleb took turns keeping watch, running themselves ragged on fear and adrenaline. On the fourth night, Caleb fell asleep in the barn. He didn't mean to, fought it hard, but exhaustion finally dragged him under. And that's when they came. Three men, moving silent through the snow. They had torches and malice, and they were headed straight for the barn. Lydia saw them from the house window. For one frozen moment, terror paralyzed her. Then instinct kicked in. She grabbed the shotgun and fired into the air, the blast shattering the night's silence. In the barn, Caleb jerked awake. He saw the torches through the slats, understood immediately, and kicked open the barn door. Stop right there, he said, rifle aimed. The three men froze. In the moonlight, Lydia could see their faces clearly now, the stranger from before and two others she didn't recognize. You're making a mistake, the stranger said. Drop the torches. Or what? You gonna shoot us? That's murder. Self-defense. You're on my property with weapons and clear intent to commit arson. Prove it. Don't need to. Just need to make sure you don't leave. Lydia ran out of the house, shotgun ready. Sheriff's already been sent for, she lied. You've got about 10 minutes before you're all in jail. The stranger's eyes darted between them, calculating odds. Then he smiled. This ain't over. Yeah, it is, Caleb said. Next time you come here, I won't fire a warning shot. The stranger's smile faded. He dropped his torch in the snow and mounted up. The other two followed. They rode off at a gallop, disappearing into the darkness. Caleb and Lydia stood in the yard, breathing hard, weapons still raised. You okay? Caleb asked. No, you? No. They stamped out the dropped torches and checked the barn for damage. Finding none, they stood there in the cold, the reality of what had almost happened settling over them like a weight. He's not going to stop, Lydia said quietly. I know. We can't keep doing this, living on no sleep, watching for attacks. It's not sustainable. So what do you want to do? Lydia looked at him. Really looked at him. At the exhaustion carved into his face, the rifle he held like it was part of him, the way he'd positioned himself between her and danger without even thinking about it. I want to end this, she said, permanently. How? We go after Kane directly, make him back off. That's dangerous. So is this. She gestured at the barn, the trampled snow where the men had stood. At least if we confront him, we're on the offensive instead of waiting for the next attack. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Okay. Tomorrow. We go to town, and we finish this. They went inside. Ruth had woken during the commotion and was waiting in the kitchen, pale and shaken. What happened? She demanded. Lydia told her. Ruth listened, her face growing harder with each word. That settles it, Ruth said when Lydia finished. I'm sending for my brother. He's got connections with the territorial marshal. This has gone beyond local law. That'll take weeks, Lydia said. Better late than never. We don't have weeks. Ruth grabbed Lydia's shoulders. Then be smart about this. Don't go charging in like your father would have. Plan. Think. And for the love of everything, don't get yourself killed over dirt and cattle. It's not just dirt and cattle. I know what it is, but it's not worth dying for. Lydia wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Because maybe Ruth was right. Maybe she was letting pride and stubbornness drive her toward something she couldn't come back from. She looked at Caleb. He was watching her with those steady eyes, waiting for her decision. We'll be careful, Lydia said finally. But we're still going. Ruth closed her eyes. Then I'm coming with you. No. You'll need a witness, someone who can testify if things go sideways. I'm coming, and that's final. There was no arguing with that tone. Lydia knew it from years of experience. Fine, she said, but you stay in the background. I'll be quiet as a mouse. None of them believed that, but they let it stand. They rode into Ridgeback the next morning, Lydia and Caleb side by side, Ruth following on her steady mare. The town was quiet, most people indoors against the cold, but Lydia could feel eyes watching from windows as they passed. They hitched their horses outside the hotel where Kane was staying. Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her face calm. Let me do the talking, she said to Caleb. No. Caleb, we do this together or we don't do it at all. She wanted to argue, but the set of his jaw told her it would be pointless. Fine. Together. They walked into the hotel. The clerk behind the desk looked up, then immediately looked away. Guilty knowledge written all over his face. Where's Kane? Lydia asked. I don't... Caleb slammed his hand on the desk. The sound cracked like a gunshot. Where? Dining room, the clerk stammered. But he's with... They were already moving. Lydia pushed through the dining room door with Caleb right behind her. Kane sat at a corner table, coffee and newspaper spread before him. He wasn't alone. Garrett Moss sat across from him, and the two men were deep in conversation. They looked up when Lydia entered. Kane's expression shifted from surprise to amusement. Moss just looked smug. Mrs. Rourke, Kane said smoothly. And Mr. Rourke, what an unexpected pleasure. Cut the shit, Lydia said. We both know you sent those men to burn down my barn. I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. 3 men, last night, with torches. Kane spread his hands. I was here all evening, the clerk can verify. As for what other people do with their time, he shrugged. I can't control everyone in Montana. But you can pay them. Again, I have no idea what you mean. Caleb stepped forward. This ends now. You back off, or we make it official. Attempted arson, intimidation, harassment. We've got witnesses. Do you? Kane glanced at Moss. Because from where I'm sitting, all you have is paranoia and circumstantial evidence. We have enough, perhaps, but by the time you gather your witnesses and file your complaints and wade through the legal system, how much will it cost you? How many more attacks will you survive? Kane leaned back in his chair. I'm a businessman, Mr. Rourke, and business is about pressure points. Everyone has them. The question is, how much pressure can you take before you break? Lydia's hands curled into fists. We're not breaking. Not yet, Moss chimed in. But you will. Winter's long, and accidents happen. If anything happens to my ranch or my stock, Lydia said, voice low and dangerous, I will personally make sure both of you pay for it. Kane's smile was reptilian. Be careful making threats, Mrs. Rourke. They have a way of coming back to haunt you. Caleb moved, fast. One moment he was standing beside Lydia, the next he had Kane by the collar, yanking him half out of his chair. Listen carefully, Caleb said, voice soft and deadly. You think you know pressure? You have no idea. But if you come after what's mine again, you're going to find out. Kane's composure cracked for the first time. Let go of me. When I'm done talking, you wanted to know about my past? Fine. I spent 5 years in a Kansas prison for killing a man who tried to take something that didn't belong to him. The judge said it was self-defense. But between you and me? Caleb leaned closer. It wasn't. I hunted him down, and I made sure he knew why he was dying. So when I tell you to back off, I'm not asking. I'm giving you a chance I didn't give him. He released Kane, who stumbled back into his chair, face pale. The dining room had gone completely silent. Every eye was on them. Lydia's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She grabbed Caleb's arm. "We're leaving." They walked out, Ruth trailing behind them. Outside, Lydia spun on Caleb. "What the hell was that?" "The truth." "You killed someone?" "Yes." "And you went to prison for it?" "Yes." Lydia stared at him, trying to reconcile this information with the quiet man she'd come to know. "Why didn't you tell me? Would it have changed your mind? About marrying me?" She wanted to say yes, wanted to be shocked and horrified and righteous, but the honest answer was, she didn't know. "I don't know," she admitted. "Exactly. So I didn't tell you, but Cain was going to dig it up eventually anyway. Better to control the narrative." "By threatening him with murder?" "I didn't threaten murder. I promised consequences." "That's the same thing." "No, it's not." Ruth cleared her throat. "As much as I'm enjoying this lover's spat, we should probably get out of town before Cain calls the sheriff." She was right. They mounted up and rode hard for the ranch, none of them speaking. When they got back, Lydia went straight to the barn. She needed space, needed air, needed to think. Caleb followed anyway. "Lydia, did you really kill someone?" "Yes." "Why?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "He hurt someone I cared about, someone who couldn't fight back. And when the law did nothing, I did." "That doesn't make it right." "I know, but it made it necessary." Lydia turned to face him. "What else haven't you told me?" "Nothing that matters." "Everything matters, Caleb. We're supposed to be partners." "How can we be partners if I don't know who you really are?" "You know exactly who I am. You've known since the day we met. I'm someone who keeps his word, who works hard, who stands by the people he—" He stopped. "The people he what?" "Cares about." The word hung between them, heavy and dangerous. "Don't," Lydia said. "Don't what?" "Don't care about me. Don't make this more complicated than it already is." "Too late." "Caleb, it's too late, Lydia. It's been too late for weeks, maybe since the beginning. I don't know when it happened, and I don't know how to stop it, but I'm done pretending." Lydia's breath caught. "We had a deal." "Fuck the deal." The words hit like a physical blow. Caleb never swore, never lost his composure, never let emotion crack through that careful control. Until now. "I didn't ask for this," he continued, voice rough. "Didn't want it. But somewhere between fixing your water pump and standing guard in your barn and watching you fight for this place like it's the only thing keeping you alive, I stopped being able to pretend this was just business. Stop." "Why?" "Because it scares you. It scares me too, but that doesn't make it less true." Lydia felt tears burning behind her eyes. "I can't do this." "Can't or won't?" "Both." "Neither. I don't know." She pressed her hands to her face. "My father just died. I almost lost everything. I married a stranger to save my home. And now you're telling me—" "What?" "That you love me?" Caleb flinched. "I'm telling you that I care. That I'm in this for more than land or money or survival. And if that's not what you want to hear, I'm sorry. But I'm done lying about it." Lydia looked at him through tears she refused to let fall. "What if I can't give you what you want?" "I'm not asking you to give me anything. I'm just asking you to stop running from what's already here." "And if I'm not ready?" "Then we wait. But we stop pretending this doesn't mean anything." Lydia wanted to argue, wanted to rebuild the walls and push him away and protect herself from the terrifying possibility of needing someone again. But she was so damn tired of fighting. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay? We stop pretending, but that's all I can give you right now." Caleb nodded slowly. "That's enough." He turned to leave, but Lydia caught his arm. "Caleb?" He looked back. "Thank you. For today. For standing with me." Something in his expression softened. "Always." He left her standing in the barn, heart pounding, world tilting on its axis. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the promise of another storm. The storm hit 2 days later with a vengeance that made the previous snowfalls look gentle. Wind screamed across the prairie, driving snow sideways until the world became nothing but white noise and fury. Lydia woke to find drifts piled against the windows and ice coating everything the wind could reach. Caleb was already up, dressed for the weather, checking supplies. "We need to get the stock closer to shelter," he said when she emerged from her room. "If this keeps up, we'll lose half the herd to exposure." They worked through the morning in conditions that would have kept most people inside. The cattle were scattered, confused by the storm, and getting them corralled took every ounce of strength they had. By the time they finished, both were soaked through with snow and sweat, fingers numb despite their gloves. Ruth had hot coffee waiting when they stumbled inside. Lydia wrapped her hands around the cup, trying to feel her fingers again. "This is going to last days," Ruth said, looking out at the white wall beyond the window. "I've seen storms like this before." "You two should settle in." Lydia glanced at Caleb. He was shedding his outer layers, moving stiffly. She realized with a jolt that she'd never really seen him vulnerable before, always composed, always capable. But right now, he looked as worn down as she felt. "You should rest," she said. "So should you." "I will. After I check the—" "Lydia." His voice was firm but not harsh. "We've done everything we can. The stock is sheltered, the barn's secure, and there's nothing else to do until this blows over. So sit down before you fall down." She wanted to argue, but her legs were already shaking. She sank into the chair by the fire and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, hours had passed. The light outside had shifted to the gray of late afternoon. She was covered with a blanket she didn't remember pulling over herself. Caleb sat across from her, whittling something from a piece of wood. His hands moved with practiced ease, shaving away thin curls that fell to the floor like snow. "How long was I out?" Lydia asked. 3 hours. "You should have woken me." "Why? So you could exhaust yourself more?" He didn't look up from his work. "You needed the sleep." Lydia sat up, the blanket falling away. "What are you making?" "Nothing important." "Can I see?" He hesitated, then held it out. It was a small carving of a horse, simple but precise, every line deliberate. The detail was remarkable for something made with just a knife. "It's beautiful," Lydia said. "It's just something to do with my hands." "Do you make a lot of these?" "Used to. In prison. Traded them for things I needed." There it was again. That casual mention of a past Lydia still didn't fully understand. She handed the carving back. "What was it like?" she asked quietly. Caleb's hand stilled. "Prison?" "Yeah." He was quiet for a long moment, considering whether to answer. "Loud," he said finally. "Even when it was quiet, it was loud. Men coughing, snoring, muttering in their sleep, guards walking their rounds, metal on metal. You learn to sleep through anything, or you don't sleep at all." "Is that why you're always awake before dawn?" "Partially. Hard to break old habits." "Do you regret it? What you did to get sent there?" Caleb met her eyes. "No. The man I killed deserved worse than what I gave him. What I regret is that it came to that the law failed so completely that someone like me had to step in." "Someone like you," Lydia repeated. "What does that mean?" "Someone who understands that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same." Lydia thought about that, about Garrett Moss and Victor Kane and all the ways the law could be twisted to protect the wrong people, about how she'd married a stranger because the law said a woman couldn't own land alone. "I think I understand that better now than I did a month ago," she said. Caleb went back to his whittling. "Nobody wants to understand it, but frontier life has a way of teaching lessons whether you want them or not." They sat in comfortable silence, the storm raging outside while the fire crackled between them. Ruth appeared briefly to leave bread and cheese, then disappeared back into the kitchen with a knowing smile that Lydia chose to ignore. "Can I ask you something?" Lydia said after a while. "Depends on the question." "Why didn't you leave? After you got out of prison, you could have gone anywhere, done anything. Why come to the middle of nowhere and live alone?" Caleb's knife paused mid-stroke. "Because I was tired of people. Tired of their judgment, their questions, their need to know everything about you. Out here, nobody cared who I was or where I came from. They left me alone. And that was all I wanted." "Was?" "Past tense, yeah." "What changed?" He looked at her. "You did." The words settled over her like the blanket had, warm and unexpected. Lydia's heart did something complicated in her chest. "I didn't mean to," she said. "I know." "Neither did I." He went back to carving. But here we are. Here they were indeed. Snowed in together, the world reduced to this house and this moment, and the truth neither of them could avoid anymore. The storm lasted 3 days. They fell into a rhythm born of necessity and proximity. Caleb woke first and got the fire going. Lydia made breakfast. They took turns checking on the stock, fighting through waist-deep snow to make sure nothing had frozen or wandered off. Evenings were spent by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in the same space. It should have been awkward. Instead, it felt natural. On the second night, Lydia found herself telling Caleb about her mother, how she'd died trying to give her father the son he'd wanted, how that loss had shaped everything that came after. "He never said it," Lydia said, staring into the fire. "But I always wondered if he wished I'd been the one who died instead, if having a son would have been worth losing her." "He didn't wish that," Caleb said quietly. "How do you know?" "Because I saw the way he set up this ranch. Everything he did so you could inherit it. That's not the action of a man who wished his daughter dead." Lydia blinked back unexpected tears. "The law says a woman can't run a ranch alone. The law's wrong about a lot of things. Doesn't make it less real." "No, but it makes it worth fighting." She looked at him. "Is that what we're doing? Fighting? Every day?" On the third night, the wind finally died. The silence was almost deafening after days of constant howling. Lydia stood at the window, watching moonlight turn the snow into something that looked almost peaceful. Caleb joined her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Storm's over," he said. "For now." "You think Cain will come back?" "I think men like Cain don't give up until they get what they want or realize the cost is too high. Then we make the cost too high." Lydia turned to face him. "How?" "By not breaking. By standing together. By showing him that we're not going anywhere." He paused. "And by making it clear that any move against you is a move against me. That's dangerous. So is breathing out here." His eyes searched hers. "I meant what I said before. I'm done pretending this is just business." "Caleb, I know you're scared. I know you're not ready, but I need you to understand something." He took a breath. "If Cain comes after you again, I won't hesitate. I won't hold back. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. Consequences be damned." "That's exactly what I'm afraid of," Lydia whispered. "That you'll get hurt because of me. That this, whatever this is between us, will cost you everything." "You think I care about that?" "You should." "Well, I don't." He reached up, hesitated, then gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I spent 5 years in prison for killing a man who hurt someone I cared about, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat if it meant keeping you safe." Lydia's breath caught. "Don't say things like that." "Why not? It's true." "Because it makes me want things I can't have." "Can't or won't?" "Does it matter?" "Yeah, it does." They stood there, inches apart, the air between them crackling with everything unsaid. Lydia could feel her resolve crumbling, could feel herself leaning towards something terrifying and inevitable. Then Ruth's voice cut through the moment. "Fire!" They spun toward the window. In the distance, orange light flickered against the darkness, coming from the direction of the southern pasture. Caleb was moving before Lydia processed what she was seeing. He grabbed his coat and rifle and was out the door in seconds. Lydia followed, her heart in her throat. They rode hard through the snow, following the orange glow. As they got closer, Lydia's worst fears crystallized into reality. The hay shed was burning. Flames licked up the wooden sides, feeding on dry hay and ancient timber. The heat was intense even from a distance, melting snow in a wide radius around the structure. "The cattle," Lydia gasped. The herd was penned nearby, too close. If the fire spread, they'd panic and stampede, or worse, get trapped. Caleb was already dismounting. "Get them out. Move them north." "What are you going to do?" "Stop it from spreading." "Caleb, you can't." "Go!" Lydia wanted to argue, but there was no time. She rode to the pen and started opening gates, shouting to drive the cattle towards safer ground. They were already spooked by the fire, eyes rolling white in the darkness, and getting them to move in any coordinated direction was like trying to herd smoke. Behind her, Caleb was working with desperate speed, using snow and a shovel to create a fire break. It was brutal, exhausting work, and Lydia could see the flames gaining ground faster than he could contain them. She got the last of the cattle clear and circled back. Caleb was covered in soot and ash, his face streaked with sweat despite the cold. "It's too big!" Lydia shouted over the roar of flames. "We need to let it burn and focus on stopping the spread." "The fence line." "Forget the fence. Save the ranch." For a heartbeat, she thought he'd argue. Then he nodded, and they worked together to widen the firebreak, using every ounce of strength they had left. It took hours. Hours of backbreaking labor, of fighting fire and wind, and their own exhaustion. By the time the flames finally started to die down, nothing left to burn. Both of them were on their knees in the snow, gasping for air. The hay shed was gone, just a smoking skeleton of blackened beams and ash. But the fire hadn't spread. The ranch was safe. Lydia looked at the destruction and felt something break inside her. "This was Cain," she said, voice raw. "This was deliberate." Caleb didn't answer, just stared at the ruins with an expression that made Lydia's blood run cold. "Caleb, I'm going to kill him." "No, you're not." "Yes, I am." He stood, swaying slightly. "This ends. Tonight. You'll hang for it." "I don't care." Lydia grabbed his arm. "Well, I do. Damn it, Caleb, I care. You can't throw your life away because of this. He tried to burn down your ranch, with you in it. We don't know that. Don't we?" Caleb's eyes were blazing hotter than the fire had been. "Who else would do this? Who else has been threatening you, pushing you, trying to force you off your land? It doesn't matter. We'll go to the sheriff. The sheriff can't do anything. You know that. Cain's covered his tracks. He'll have an alibi. And even if we prove it was him, the law moves too slow." He pulled free of her grip. "I won't wait for him to try again. I won't risk you." "This isn't about risk. It's about you wanting revenge." "You're damn right I want revenge, and justice, and every other thing he's got coming to him." "And what about me?" Lydia's voice cracked. "What about what I want? What do you want?" "I want you alive. I want you here. Not in prison, not on the run, not dead because you went after a man with more money and power than we'll ever have." Caleb stared at her, chest heaving. "He can't get away with this. He won't. But we do this the right way." "There is no right way out here. You know that." "Then we make one." They stood in the snow, smoke curling around them, the ruins of the hay shed still glowing in the darkness. Lydia could see Caleb warring with himself, rage and reason battling for control. Finally, he let out a long breath. "What do you suggest?" "We document everything. We gather evidence. We get witnesses. And we build a case so airtight that even Cain's money can't buy him out of it. That'll take time. Then we take time. Together." Caleb's jaw worked. "And if he tries something else while we're building this perfect case, then we deal with it. But we deal with it smart, not reckless." She stepped closer. "I need you, Caleb. Not your revenge, not your violence. You, alive and free and here with me." Something in his expression shifted. "You need me." "Yes." "Say it again." "I need you, Lydia said, and felt the truth of it resonate through her entire body. "I need you, and I'm not ready to lose you over this." Caleb reached for her then, hesitant, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand curved around her jaw, rough and warm. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. "Promise me." "I promise." They stood there in the wreckage and the smoke, holding on to each other like anchors in a storm. Around them, the night was still and cold, the fire reduced to embers. Lydia let herself lean into him, just for a moment, drawing strength from his solid presence. His other arm came around her, pulling her close, and she realized this was the first time they'd truly embraced, not out of necessity or performance, but because they needed it. "We should get back," Caleb said after a long moment. "Yeah." But neither of them moved. Finally, Ruth's voice carried across the snow. "Are you two alive over there?" They pulled apart reluctantly. Lydia cleared her throat. "We're alive." "Good. Then get back here before you freeze to death." They rode back to the house slowly, exhaustion weighing them down. Ruth took one look at them and started issuing orders, hot water for washing, food, dry clothes. She didn't ask questions about what had happened between them in the ruins, just took care of them with quiet efficiency. Later, cleaned up and fed, Lydia sat by the fire trying to process everything. The attack, the fire, the conversation with Caleb, the way it had felt to admit she needed him. Caleb emerged from his room, hair still damp, fresh bruises forming on his arms from fighting the fire. "You should rest," Lydia said. "So should you." "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see flames." He sat beside her. "It'll pass. Will it? Or is this just the beginning? Kane's escalating. Who knows what he'll try next? We'll figure it out." "How can you be so calm?" "I'm not calm. I'm furious. But fury doesn't help right now. Planning does." Lydia laughed bitterly. "Planning. Right, because that's worked so well for us. It kept you alive tonight." "Barely. Barely's enough." She looked at him, at the soot still smudged along his jawline, the exhaustion carved into his features, the steadfast determination in his eyes. This man who'd appeared out of nowhere and somehow become essential to her survival. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For earlier. For stopping me from doing something stupid." "You weren't going to do anything stupid. You never do." "I was ready to let you go after Kane. But you didn't. You chose the smart play. That's not weakness, Lydia. That's strength. Doesn't feel strong. It never does." They sat in silence, shoulders touching, watching the fire burn down to coals. Outside, the world was dark and cold and full of threats. But in here, in this moment, they had each other. And maybe that was enough. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the sun reflecting off fresh snow in a way that made everything look clean and new. It was a lie, of course. The charred remains of the hay shed were still visible in the southern pasture, a stark reminder of the danger they faced. But Lydia woke with renewed determination. Kane wanted her broken and desperate. He wanted her to sell out of fear. Well, she'd been afraid long enough. She found Caleb already outside, examining the damage in daylight. The destruction looked worse in the sun, more complete, more deliberate. "Whoever set this knew what they were doing," Caleb said when she joined him. "See how the burn pattern radiates from multiple points? They used accelerant, made sure it would spread fast." Lydia's jaw tightened. "Can we prove it?" "Maybe, if we can find traces of whatever they used." "And if we can, then we have evidence, real evidence, not just suspicion." They spent the morning sifting through ash and debris, collecting samples of anything that looked suspicious. It was grim work, but necessary. Around noon, a rider appeared on the horizon. Lydia tensed, hand moving instinctively toward the rifle leaning against the fence. But as the figure got closer, she recognized Sheriff Doyle. He rode up looking troubled. "Mrs. Rourke, Mr. Rourke, I heard about the fire." "News travels fast," Lydia said. "Ruth sent word." Doyle dismounted and surveyed the damage. "This doesn't look like an accident." "It wasn't," Caleb said. "You have proof?" Caleb showed him the accelerant traces they'd found. Doyle examined them, his frown deepening. "This is serious," he said. "Arson's a hanging offense." "We know who did it," Lydia said. "Knowing and proving are different things." "We're working on the proving part." Doyle sighed. "I'll be honest with you. Even if you can prove Kane ordered this, getting a conviction will be near impossible. He's got lawyers, money, influence, and you've got—" He gestured at the ranch. "This." "So what are you saying?" Lydia demanded. "That we should just accept it?" "I'm saying be realistic and be careful. Men like Kane don't stop unless they're forced to." "Then we'll force him." Doyle shook his head. "Just don't do anything that'll get you killed or arrested." He glanced at Caleb. "I heard what you said to Kane in town about your past. It's true." "I know. I checked. 5 years in Leavenworth for manslaughter. Self-defense, the judge said, but barely. You walk a thin line, Rourke." "I'm aware." "Then stay on the right side of it, because if you cross over, I won't be able to help you." "Understood." Doyle mounted up. "I'll file a report about the fire, but don't expect much to come of it." He tipped his hat to Lydia. "Watch yourselves." He rode off, leaving them alone with the ruins and the reality of their situation. "He's right," Lydia said quietly. "We're outgunned." "Doesn't mean we're outmatched." "How do you figure?" Caleb looked at the burned hay shed, then back at her. "Because Kane's playing by rules, money, lawyers, intimidation. But out here, those rules only go so far. Out here, what matters is who's willing to stand their ground when it counts." "And you think we can?" I know we can. We already have. Lydia wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the certainty he seemed to carry so easily. But fear kept whispering in her ear, reminding her of everything she could lose, everything she'd already started to lose. That night she couldn't sleep, kept seeing flames every time she closed her eyes. Finally, she gave up and went to the kitchen for water. She found Caleb there, sitting in the dark. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "No." She sat across from him. "What are you thinking about?" "How to end this without getting either of us killed." "Any luck?" "Not yet. Not." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Lydia said, "What happens after? Assuming we survive this, assuming Kane backs off or gets arrested or whatever, what happens to us?" Caleb looked at her. "What do you want to happen?" "I don't know. This whole thing started as a business arrangement, but it's not that anymore, is it?" "No." "So what is it?" He was quiet for a long moment. "It's whatever we make it." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got." He leaned forward. "I can't tell you what this is, Lydia. I can tell you what I want it to be. But what it actually becomes? That's up to both of us." "What do you want it to be?" "Real. Honest. Something worth fighting for." Lydia's throat tightened. "I'm not good at this. At letting people in." "Neither am I." "Then how are we supposed to?" "We figure it out together, one day at a time." It sounded so simple when he said it like that, so possible. "Okay," Lydia whispered. "Okay. One day at a time. We'll figure it out." Caleb smiled, small but genuine. "That's all I'm asking." They sat there until dawn started creeping through the windows, neither speaking, neither needing to. And when the sun finally rose, painting the snow gold and pink, Lydia felt something shift inside her. Not certainty, not fearlessness, but hope. And for now, that was enough. The break came from an unexpected source. A week after the fire, a man showed up at the ranch, thin, nervous, with the look of someone who'd been running for a long time. He introduced himself as Henry Pritchard, and Lydia recognized the last name immediately. "Any relation to Edward Pritchard?" she asked, hand resting on the rifle by the door. "My brother," Henry said, "and that's why I'm here." Caleb appeared behind Lydia, silent but present. Henry's eyes flicked to him and away, swallowing hard. "I don't have much time," Henry said. "Edward's working for Kane and Moss, but he's not like them. He took the job because we needed money, but what they're doing..." He pulled an envelope from his coat. "These are copies of documents, letters between Kane and Moss, instructions for the arson, payment records for the men they hired." Lydia took the envelope with shaking hands. "Why are you giving us this?" "Because what they did was wrong, and because Edward's scared. He thought it was just legal work, contracts, paperwork. He didn't know they'd go this far." Henry's voice cracked. "Your father was a good man, Mrs. Rourke. He gave my family work when we were starving. I can't let his daughter lose everything because my brother made a bad choice." "This could put your brother in danger," Caleb said. "I know, but it's the right thing." Henry backed toward his horse. "There's one more thing. Kane's planning something big. I don't know what, but I heard him and Moss talking about forcing the issue before spring. Whatever they're planning, it's soon." He mounted up and rode off before Lydia could ask more questions. Inside, she and Caleb spread the documents across the kitchen table. There it was in black and white, proof of conspiracy, of arson, of everything they'd suspected but couldn't prove. Letters signed by Kane authorizing payments, receipts for materials used in the fire, even a ledger showing money paid to the 3 men who'd tried to burn down the barn that first night. "This is enough," Lydia breathed. "This is more than enough." "For what?" Caleb asked. "To take them down. To get them arrested." "Maybe. If we can get it in front of the right people before Kane realizes what we have." Ruth appeared in the doorway. "My brother's in town, the one with Marshall connections. I sent word yesterday and he just arrived." Lydia looked up. "How fast can he get a marshal here?" "If he leaves today, 3 days, maybe 4. "That's too long," Caleb said. "If Kane's planning something soon, we need protection now." "Then we go on the offensive," Lydia said. "We take this evidence to Sheriff Doyle, get Kane and Moss arrested before they can make another move." Doyle already said he can't do much against Kane's lawyers. That was before we had proof. This changes everything. Caleb studied the documents, his expression troubled. It does, but it also makes us targets. The minute Kane knows we have this, he'll come after us hard. So we move fast. We ride to town right now, file charges, and make sure everyone knows what we have. Safety in numbers. Or we paint a bigger target on our backs. Lydia slammed her hand on the table. I'm tired of being afraid, Caleb. I'm tired of waiting for the next attack. We have evidence. We have witnesses. We have a chance to end this, and I'm taking it. Caleb held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. Okay, we go. But we go smart. They left within the hour, the documents secured in Lydia's saddlebag, rifles loaded and ready. Ruth stayed behind with strict instructions to lock everything down and not open the door for anyone. The ride to Ridgeback felt longer than it was. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made Lydia's hand drift toward her weapon, but they made it to town without incident. Sheriff Doyle was in his office, looking over some paperwork when they walked in. He stood when he saw their faces. What happened? Lydia laid the documents on his desk. Evidence. Proof that Victor Kane and Garrett Moss conspired to commit arson and intimidation. Doyle's eyes widened as he read. His face went from skeptical to shocked to grim. Where did you get this? Does it matter? It might. Chain of custody matters in court. A witness provided it, someone with access to Kane's communications. He'll testify if needed. Doyle sat back, rubbing his face. This is big. Bigger than I can handle alone. Then get help. Contact the marshal, but do something. Because if you don't, Kane's going to escalate, and someone's going to die. Doyle looked at Caleb. You understand what this means? If I arrest Kane, he'll throw every lawyer in the territory at us. It'll get ugly. It's already ugly, Caleb said. At least this way we're fighting back. Doyle nodded slowly. All right, I'll send for the marshal. In the meantime, I'll bring Kane and Moss in for questioning. Keep them contained until we can build a formal case. How long will that take? A day? Maybe 2. I need to verify these documents, get statements, make sure everything's airtight before I make my move. We don't have 2 days, Lydia said. It's the best I can do. Go home. Lock your doors. Don't go anywhere alone. I'll send word when it's done. They left the sheriff's office feeling exposed and vulnerable. On the street, people stared. Word had clearly spread about the confrontation with Kane, about the fire, about everything. Lydia felt their eyes like physical weight. We should get supplies before we head back, Caleb said. Who knows when we'll make it to town again. They were loading their horses outside the general store when Garrett Moss appeared, flanked by 2 men Lydia didn't recognize. Well, well, Moss said, smile sharp as a knife. The happy couple. Heard you had an interesting conversation with the sheriff. We're done talking to you, Lydia said. Are you? Because I think we're just getting started. He gestured to his companions. See, Mr. Kane thought you might try something desperate, so he asked me to keep an eye on you. Make sure you don't do anything rash. That sounds like a threat, Caleb said quietly. Does it? I'm just concerned for your safety. Terrible things happen in winter. Accidents, misunderstandings, people disappearing into storms and never being found. Caleb's hand moved to his rifle. Moss's men tensed. Don't, Lydia murmured. Listen to your wife, Moss said. She's smarter than you are. She knows when she's beaten. I'm not beaten, Lydia said, and neither is he. So you can tell Kane that whatever he's planning, it won't work. We've got evidence, we've got witnesses, and we're not backing down. Moss's smile faded. You think evidence matters? Kane owns half the judges in Montana. He'll bury you in legal motions until you're bankrupt and broken. Maybe, but he'll have to explain those documents first. And I don't think his lawyers can make conspiracy and arson disappear no matter how much money he throws at them. For the first time, Moss looked uncertain. What documents? Ask Kane. I'm sure he'll explain. Lydia mounted her horse. Now get out of our way. Moss stepped aside, but his expression promised retribution. As Lydia and Caleb rode out of town, she could feel his eyes boring into her back. That was a mistake, Caleb said when they were clear of town. Now, they know we have something. Good. Let them sweat. Lydia, They've had us on the defensive for months. It's time they knew what it feels like. Caleb didn't argue, but his jaw was tight with worry. They were halfway home when they saw the smoke, black and thick, rising from the direction of the ranch. Lydia's heart stopped. "No," she whispered. They spurred their horses into a gallop, racing across the snow-covered prairie. As they got closer, Lydia could see flames. Not the hay shed this time, but the barn. The main barn where they'd stored equipment, supplies, everything they needed to survive winter. And worse, she couldn't see Ruth anywhere. They dismounted at a run. The heat was intense, flames already consuming the upper levels. Lydia started toward the house, but Caleb grabbed her arm. "Wait," he said, scanning the area. "This could be a trap. Ruth's in there." "We don't know that. Let me check." He moved toward the house with his rifle ready, checking corners and shadows. Lydia followed despite his order to wait, her own weapon raised. The front door was open. Inside, furniture was overturned, signs of a struggle everywhere. But no Ruth. "Ruth," Lydia called. "Ruth, where are you?" No answer. They searched the house room by room, fear mounting with every empty space. Finally, in the kitchen, they found a note pinned to the table with a knife. The handwriting was elegant, mocking. "Mrs. Rourke, your housekeeper is safe, for now. If you want to see her alive, you'll bring those documents to the Ridgeback Hotel before sunset. Come alone. Any sign of the sheriff or federal involvement, and she dies. VK." Lydia stared at the note, rage and terror warring inside her. He took her. That bastard took Ruth. Caleb's face was carved from stone. "This is my fault. I should have stayed, should have protected. This isn't your fault. It's Kane's, and he's going to pay for it. We need to think this through." "There's nothing to think through. He has Ruth. We have what he wants. We make the trade." "It's a trap, Lydia. He'll take the documents and kill all three of us." "Then what do you suggest? Let Ruth die?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his expression hardened. "No, we give him what he wants, but we do it our way." They spent the next hour preparing. Caleb rode to town and found Doyle, explaining the situation. The sheriff wanted to organize a rescue, but Caleb convinced him that any official presence would get Ruth killed. Instead, they made a different plan. When Caleb returned, he and Lydia went over every detail until they could execute it in their sleep. "This is dangerous," Caleb said as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. "Everything about this has been dangerous. If this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does," he grabbed her hand. "If it does, I need you to run. Don't try to save me. Don't try to be a hero. Just run and don't look back." "I'm not leaving you." "Lydia!" "I said I'm not leaving you. We're partners, remember? Equal say in everything. And I say we both walk out of this alive." Caleb's grip tightened. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "And you're just figuring this out now?" He smiled despite everything. "No. I knew from the moment you showed up in the rain demanding I marry you." "I didn't demand. I offered. You demanded." This ridiculous argument in the face of mortal danger should have been absurd. Instead, it felt necessary, a reminder of what they were fighting for. They rode to town as the sun touched the horizon, painting the snow blood red. The hotel loomed before them, windows dark except for one on the second floor where a lamp burned. Lydia dismounted with the envelope of documents. Caleb stayed with the horses, positioned where he could see both the hotel entrance and the back alley. They'd agreed he wouldn't come inside. Kane would be expecting that, might even have planned for it. But Kane wasn't expecting what they'd actually planned. Lydia climbed the stairs to the second floor, each step measured and deliberate. The hallway was empty, doors closed. She found the room with light spilling from beneath it and knocked. "Come in, Mrs. Rourke." She opened the door. The room was large, well furnished. Kane had clearly rented the best the hotel offered. He sat in a wingback chair by the window, looking relaxed and confident. Garrett Moss stood behind him, arms crossed, and tied to a chair in the corner, gagged but alive, was Ruth. Lydia met Ruth's eyes and saw fury there, not fear. Good. Ruth was a fighter. "You have the documents?" Kane asked. Lydia held up the envelope. "I want Ruth released first. I don't think you're in a position to make demands." "Then we're at an impasse, because I'm not giving you anything until I know she's safe." Kane studied her. You've got spine. I'll give you that. Most women would have crumbled by now. I'm not most women. No, you're really not. He gestured to Moss. Untie her. Moss moved toward Ruth, but before he could reach her, the door burst open. Sheriff Doyle stood there with his gun drawn, and behind him, 4 armed deputies. Nobody move, Doyle ordered. Kane's composure finally cracked. What is this? Arrest, Doyle said. Victor Kane, Garrett Moss, you're both under arrest for conspiracy, arson, kidnapping, and attempted murder. You have no authority. I have plenty of authority, and I have evidence, witnesses, and a federal marshal on his way who's very interested in talking to you both. Moss lunged for Lydia, but she was ready. She'd slipped her hand into her coat pocket while Kane was distracted, and now she pulled out her father's old revolver, small but deadly. Don't, she said. Moss froze. Smart, Caleb said from the doorway, his rifle aimed at Kane. Now get down on the floor, both of you. For a moment, Kane looked like he might refuse. Then he saw the determination in every face surrounding him and realized he was outmatched. Slowly, he lowered himself to the floor. Moss followed, cursing under his breath. Doyle's deputies moved in, securing both men with handcuffs. Lydia rushed to Ruth, untying her and removing the gag. Are you all right? Lydia asked. Ruth massaged her wrists, glaring at Moss. I've been better, but I'll live. She looked at Kane. That one talks too much. Spent an hour explaining his whole plan like I was supposed to be impressed. What plan? Doyle asked. Ruth's smile was sharp. The one where he was going to kill Lydia and Caleb, make it look like they died in the barn fire, and claim the ranch through some legal loophole involving unpaid debts and abandoned property. He even bragged about having a judge lined up to approve it. Kane's face went white. She's lying. Am I? Because I remember every word. Names, dates, amounts. You really should be more careful about what you say in front of witnesses. Ruth looked at Doyle. I'll testify to all of it. Doyle's expression was grim satisfaction. That's good enough for me. Get them out of here. As the deputies hauled Kane and Moss away, Kane looked back at Lydia. This isn't over. I have lawyers. I have money. I'll be out before the week's done. Maybe, Lydia said. But every day you spend fighting these charges is a day you're not bothering me. And eventually, even your money will run out. Kane's eyes blazed with impotent fury as he was dragged from the room. When they were gone, Lydia sagged against the wall. The adrenaline that had kept her upright drained away, leaving her shaking. Caleb was there immediately, steadying her. You okay? No, yes. I don't know. She looked up at him. Is it really over? The immediate threat? Yeah. But Kane was right about one thing. He'll fight this. It could take months to go to trial. Let it take months. We'll be ready. Doyle approached. You two did good work. Risky as hell, but good. That stunt with making them think you were coming alone while we set up around back? He shook his head. Could have gone wrong a dozen ways. But it didn't, Caleb said. This time, don't make a habit of it. They collected Ruth and headed downstairs. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Seemed like half the town had heard about the arrests and come to see. As Lydia emerged, people started applauding. It was strange, surreal. These same people who'd whispered about her hasty marriage and doubted her ability to run the ranch were now celebrating her victory. A hand touched Lydia's arm. She turned to find the woman whose child they'd saved from under the wagon. Thank you, the woman said quietly. Kane tried to buy my husband's smithy last month. Threatened us when we refused. Now maybe we can sleep without wondering when he'll come back. Others approached with similar stories. Kane had hurt a lot of people, pushed too many boundaries, made too many enemies. Lydia's fight had become their fight. By the time they rode out of town, the sun had set completely, but the moon was bright enough to light their way home. The barn was still smoldering when they arrived, but the house was intact. They'd lost equipment and supplies, but those could be replaced. What mattered was that they were all alive. Ruth went inside to make tea, her solution to everything. Lydia and Caleb stood in the yard looking at the damage. We'll rebuild, Caleb said. I know. It'll take time, money, work. I know that too. He turned to face her. But we'll do it together. Lydia met his eyes. In the moonlight, they looked almost silver. Together. I like the sound of that. Yeah? Yeah. She took a breath. I've been thinking about what you said, about what you want this to be. And? I want it to be real, too. Messy and complicated and probably harder than we expect, but real. Caleb's expression softened. You sure? No. I'm terrified, actually. Letting someone in means risking getting hurt, but I'm more afraid of never taking the risk at all. That's very wise. Don't sound so surprised. He laughed, a real laugh, warm and genuine. I'm not surprised. You're the smartest person I know. Now you're just flattering me. Is it working? Maybe. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. His palm was rough with calluses, warm despite the cold. It felt right. So what now? Caleb asked. Now we go inside, drink Ruth's terrible tea, and figure out how to rebuild a barn before spring. That's very practical. I'm a practical woman. One of the many things He stopped. Things you what? Caleb hesitated, then said, Things I admire about you. Lydia suspected that wasn't what he'd been about to say, but she didn't push. Some things needed time. They walked toward the house together, hands linked, the future uncertain, but theirs to shape. The trial happened in early spring. By then, the barn had been rebuilt, smaller than before but sturdy. The ranch was recovering, and Lydia and Caleb had settled into a routine that felt less like an arrangement and more like a life. Victor Kane's lawyers did everything they could to discredit the evidence, but Henry Pritchard's documents were ironclad. Combined with Ruth's testimony and statements from the men Kane had hired, who turned on him when offered immunity, the case was overwhelming. Kane was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. Garrett Moss got 10. Both would likely serve every day of it. After the verdict, Lydia and Caleb stood outside the courthouse, watching deputies lead the two men away in chains. Kane looked diminished somehow, all his money and power stripped away, leaving just a bitter old man facing consequences for the first time in his life. Feel good? Caleb asked. Not really, Lydia admitted. I thought it would, but mostly I just feel tired. Justice doesn't always feel satisfying. No, but it feels right. They rode home through countryside just starting to green up after winter. The trees were budding, the creek was running high with snowmelt, and the air smelled like thaw and possibility. Ruth had dinner waiting when they arrived. Over the months, she'd stopped being just the housekeeper and become part of their odd little family. She bossed them around, kept them fed, and asked intrusive questions about when they were going to stop being idiots and admit what everyone else already knew. That night, after Ruth had gone to bed, Lydia and Caleb sat on the porch watching stars emerge. I've been thinking, Lydia said. Dangerous. She elbowed him. About us. About this marriage. Caleb tensed slightly. Yeah? We should make it real. Legally, I mean. Properly. It is legal. We signed papers. You know what I mean. A real marriage. Not an arrangement or a deal or whatever we've been calling it. And what would that look like? Lydia turned to face him. I don't know exactly. I've never done this before. But I know I want you here. Not as a business partner or a convenience. As my husband. Actually, my husband. Caleb's expression was careful, guarded. Why? Because The words stuck in her throat. She'd never said them before, never let herself feel them fully. But they were there, undeniable and true. Because I love you. Caleb went very still. Say that again. I love you. I probably have for a while, but I was too stubborn and scared to admit it. You're sure? Yes. Because once you say it, you can't take it back. I don't want to take it back. Caleb stood and pulled her to her feet. His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. I love you too, he said quietly. I have since before I had words for it. Since you showed up in the rain looking fierce and desperate, and so damn determined to save what was yours. I've loved you through every argument and every crisis and every moment in between. Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. Why didn't you say anything? Because you needed time, and I was willing to wait forever if that's what it took. You're too patient. One of us has to be. She laughed through tears. So what now? Now? Caleb leaned down until their foreheads touched. Now we stop pretending. We build a life together. We fight and make up and work this ranch and drive each other crazy. We do all the messy, complicated, beautiful things that make a marriage real. That sounds hard. Probably. Worth it, though? Definitely. He kissed her then, gentle at first, then deeper, full of everything they'd been holding back for months. Lydia wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all her fear and hope and love into it. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "We should probably go inside," Caleb said. "Probably." Neither of them moved. "I like it out here, though," Lydia said, "under the stars, where everything started." Everything started in the rain. Before that. When you were here alone, and I was in my father's house planning how to save it. That's when it started. We just didn't know it yet. Caleb pulled her close, and they stood there in the darkness, holding each other, two people who'd found something neither had been looking for. The months that followed were hard work. Ranching always was. But they weren't hard in the way the winter had been hard. This was the good kind of difficult, the kind that built something instead of tearing it down. They bought new cattle in the spring, hired 2 hands to help with the work, good men who'd been run off their own land by men like Cain and were grateful for honest employment. The ranch started to thrive in ways it hadn't even when Lydia's father was alive. Ruth watched it all with satisfaction, occasionally mentioning that she'd known from the beginning how this would turn out. Lydia and Caleb let her believe it, though they both knew the truth. Nobody could have predicted this. Not the danger or the triumph or the way 2 broken people could somehow make each other whole. One evening in late summer, Lydia found Caleb in the barn, working on a project he'd been secretive about for weeks. When she approached, he tried to hide it, but she caught a glimpse. It was a cradle. Beautifully carved, every joint perfect, the wood sanded smooth as glass. "Caleb," she breathed. He looked embarrassed. "I know we haven't talked about it, but I thought, eventually, it's beautiful." "You're not upset?" "Why would I be upset?" "Because I'm assuming things, making plans without asking." Lydia ran her hand over the cradle's curved edge. "I want children, someday, when we're ready." "Yeah?" "Yeah. I want to fill this house with noise and chaos and tiny humans who have your patience and my stubbornness." "That sounds terrifying." "Completely terrifying." Caleb grinned. "Can't wait." That night they lay in bed, their bed now, the walls between them finally demolished, and talked about the future. About expanding the ranch, about children, about growing old together. "Do you ever regret it?" Lydia asked. "Saying yes when I showed up asking you to marry me?" "Not once." "Even when I was difficult?" "Especially then." He turned to face her. "You challenged me, made me want to be better, made me want to build something instead of just existing." "I didn't do that. You did. We did it together. That's the point." Lydia nestled closer. "I never thanked you properly. For saving me." "You saved yourself. I just helped. We saved each other." "Yeah. I guess we did." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, safe and whole. November came around again, a full year since Lydia had ridden through the rain to propose a marriage of convenience to a stranger. The anniversary felt significant somehow, worth marking. Ruth insisted on making a proper dinner. She spent all day cooking while Lydia and Caleb worked the ranch, pretending they didn't know she was planning something. That evening, they gathered around the table, Lydia, Caleb, Ruth, and the 2 ranch hands who'd become friends. Ruth had outdone herself. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden they'd planted that spring. As they ate, someone proposed a toast. "To survival," one of the hands said, raising his glass. "To stubbornness," Ruth added, with a pointed look at Lydia. "To second chances," Caleb said quietly. They all drank. Then Lydia raised her own glass. "To partnership," she said. "To learning that asking for help isn't weakness. To discovering that sometimes the best things come from the worst situations. And to love that grows slow and strong, like everything worth having out here." She looked at Caleb as she said it. He met her eyes and smiled, that rare, genuine smile that still made her heart skip. "To love," he echoed. They drank, and the conversation flowed into easier territories. Stories were shared, laughter filled the room, and for a while the hardships of the past year felt distant. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Lydia stood at the window looking out at the ranch, the barn they'd rebuilt. The fences they'd mended, the land her father had left her and she'd fought to keep, but more than that, the life she'd built. Not alone like she'd thought she'd have to, but with someone who understood that strength didn't mean never needing help. That partnership meant sharing both burdens and joys. That love wasn't something you fell into, but something you built, day by day, choice by choice. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That a year ago I thought I had to do everything alone, that needing someone made me weak. And now? Now I know that the strongest thing I ever did was ask for help. And the luckiest thing that ever happened to me was you saying yes." Caleb rested his chin on her shoulder. "I was the lucky one. We're both lucky. Can't argue with that." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the moon rise over land that was theirs, not because of contracts or legal maneuvering, but because they'd earned it, together. Outside, winter was coming again, but this time, Lydia wasn't afraid. She had supplies laid in, plans made, and someone to share the burden of whatever came next. She had Caleb. And somehow, against all odds, that had become everything. The frontier was still harsh. The law was still imperfect. The world was still full of men who thought they could take what didn't belong to them. But Lydia Rourke now, truly and completely, had learned something those men never would. That real strength came from knowing when to fight and when to ask for help. That survival sometimes meant compromise, but it never meant surrender. That the hardest battles weren't fought alone, but side by side with someone who saw you at your worst and chose to stay anyway. She'd started this journey thinking she needed a husband to save her ranch. She'd ended it discovering she'd needed a partner to save herself. And in the process, she'd found something more valuable than land or money or pride. She'd found home. Not in the place, but in the person standing beside her. That was the real victory. Not over Cain or Moss or the law that said women couldn't stand alone, but over her own fear of needing someone, of letting someone in, of trusting that love could be built on foundation as solid as shared work and mutual respect. It wasn't the fairy tale version of love, wasn't grand gestures or perfect moments. It was quiet mornings and hard work and arguments over practical matters. It was fixing fences together and falling into bed exhausted. It was learning each other's rhythms and accommodating each other's flaws. It was real, and real, Lydia had learned, was so much better than perfect. "You ready for another winter?" Caleb asked, breaking the silence. Lydia turned in his arms to face him. "With you? I'm ready for anything." "That's a dangerous promise." "Good thing I've got a dangerous man to keep me safe." He laughed. "I love you." "I love you too." They kissed there in the moonlight, two people who'd started as strangers bound by desperation and become something neither had expected, partners in every sense of the word. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, soft and silent. Inside, the fire burned warm, and between them, something even warmer took root and flourished. Not a deal anymore. Not an arrangement. Just two people choosing each other, day after day, building a life from scratch in a place that demanded everything and gave back only to those stubborn enough to stay. They'd stay. Together. And that made all the difference.